Lights Out, chapter 33, and it's a shorty, really short. So we as iguana kill it off. The whole class was dumbfounded. No one spoke a word, and they just watched John walk off toward his house, most with their mouths open. Mark decided to dismiss the class. I guess that'll be all for today. I'll see you next week. Some of Beta Shift left, but many of them came up to Mark and told him that he had more patience than they had. Should have broken his arm, one man told him. I'm going to see Gunny right now, Charlie, the leader of Beta Shift, said. I'm going to suggest that he be removed from guard duty. Susan came up. What a baby! I can't believe he would try something like that. You sure put him in his place, though. That ought to fix his wagon. I'm afraid I might have made things worse, Mark admitted. I don't know what else. Excuse me, Jess interrupted. I need to check on my husband's eye. Mark noticed a little edge in his wife's voice. Could she be jealous of Susan? That might explain why she signed up for guard duty. Mark realized he had been talking quite a bit about how much he admired Susan, but if Jess thought he had any romantic feelings toward her, she was mistaken. Jess looked at his eye and then called Lisa over to check it out. Lisa said that the orbit wasn't broken and suggested he get some ice on it to keep it from swelling. They walked back to the camper and got the ice trays out of the propane-powered refrigerator. Mark looked in the mirror and noticed that his eye was already turning purple. He put the ice on it and sat back to relax. A few minutes later, Gunny came to speak with him. He asked exactly what had happened and listened intently as Mark gave the blow-by-blow. When Mark was done, Gunny spoke. We have to kick him out. Yeah, Charlie told me he wanted him out of the guards, and I knew you'd agree. I guess I do too. I don't just mean out of the guards, Karate Man. I mean, we got to kick him out of the subdivision. We can't do that, Gunny. He owns a home here. How are we going to kick him out of his own house? I don't rightly know. But how are you ever going to be able to turn your back on him again? The old Marine asked. No, but I don't know if that's grounds for kicking him out. Listen, Karate Man, if John can attack you, what makes you think he won't attack someone else? You know things ain't the same as they were a month ago. Our job as guards is to protect ourselves from danger from the outside. We can't be looking over our shoulders and do that job efficiently. If some of your MZBs get in here and kill us all because we weren't 100% focused on our job, then everything else all of us have worked so hard to build here is for nothing. I see what you mean, Gunny. I guess we could get a group together tonight to discuss it, Mark thought out loud. That sounds like a good start. Who do you have in mind? The security committee, plus Manny, Charlie, and Scott, maybe Doc Vasquez, too. Gunny agreed with Mark. He suggested they keep the group relatively small at first. If word got out what they were talking about, it could push John over the edge even more, Gunny said. Mark ate his lunch and then took some aspirin for his throbbing eye. His next class was at 2 o'clock. He would have checked on how things were going around the neighborhood to keep his mind off of how much his eye hurt, but he knew he'd have to tell the story about what happened 1,000 times. He decided to read for a while. He had a new Stephen Hunter book that he hadn't gotten to yet, but it seemed like a waste of time to read a novel. He needed to build a chicken coop for the chickens Manny was hatching for him. He wondered if he had any books that would help him with that. As he looked through the books in his study, David came into the house calling for him. Dad, are you in here? The young man called. Yes, son, I'm in the study. David appeared in the doorway, out of breath. What's up? The sheriff is down at the gate. He wants to see you, David said between huffs. Would you mind walking back down to the gate and showing the sheriff back to the house? No, sir, I don't mind at all. David took off running back down the hill. Mark wondered what the sheriff could want. He didn't have to wait long to find out. David showed the lawmen into the house, and Mark shook his hand. What brings you out here, Sheriff? I just wanted to bring your guns back to you. You got done with the ballistics testing already? Actually, no, but with the way things are going in the country, I don't think the lab is going to be able to get it done for a long while. Besides, the boys who ambushed you gave a full compression, and no one was shown up to claim the dead ones. I figured they were better off in your hands than just gathering dust in the evidence locker. The tall man got a quizzical look on his face. Nice shiner, what happened? Oh, I was teaching a self-defense class and we had a little accident, Mark said, praying David wouldn't say anything. Uh-huh. Looks like your little accident has a big punch, the lawman smiled. Yeah, I guess so. What kind of self-defense do you teach? Just the basic stuff we use in American karate. You're not a black belt, are you? Yes. Then why haven't you been down to my office to register your hands as lethal weapons? The sheriff said with a straight face and a gruff voice. Mark didn't know what to say. There was no such law, but urban legend had spread this myth around so much that many people believed it. Surely the sheriff knew the truth. About the time Mark was going to speak, the sheriff got a big grin on his face. Had you go in there for a minute, didn't I? You sure did. I was trying to figure out how I was going to explain to you that it was an urban legend. Mark was relieved. Your guns are in my trunk. Come on out and get them. Mark followed the sheriff out to his cruiser. As he opened the trunk, he spoke again. Y'all have really made some security upgrades around here. Have you had any more trouble? Only a little from a bunch of drunk people the other night, but they left with only their pride wounded a little. Other than that, it's been pretty quiet. We've had a couple similar incidents in Floresville and one in La Vernia. One of them went bad, though, and one person was killed and a couple more wounded before we got it under control. That's too bad. I guess we can't expect things to be like they were, Mark said as he looked at his Colt lightweight commander like a long-lost love. I guess not, and it's probably going to get a lot worse, the sheriff said, noticing the look on Mark's face. But it looks like you all are pretty squared away. That's some gate you have there, and those fighting holes and lookout towers look serious, too. Mark snapped out of his trance. Yeah, we just don't want to get caught with our pants down. Mark thought about telling the lawman about the OP and the CP and the other security precautions they had, but he decided he didn't quite know the man well enough to spill all the beans. For some reason, though, he felt he could trust this man. Maybe it was a uniform. No, Mark thought it was more than that, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He looked at the sheriff and felt as if he was being sized up in return. Listen, I could use some help. The sheriff hesitated as if he was unsure what to say. This is a route from San Antonio that I don't have the manpower to cover like I want. We're stretched pretty thin just trying to cover the 2 highways from the city. If I brought you a radio, would you be willing to let me know if you think we have trouble headed into our county from here? Plus, if something happens, you could contact us without having to drive into town. I think we can handle that, Mark said with a smile. Good. I'll bring the radio out in the morning. The sheriff shook Mark's hand and left in his cruiser. Mark went back into the house and put the FAL into the safe. He also unloaded the Colt Gold Cup. Abby had given him and placed it on his hip with the lightweight commander. Boom. The Gold Cup was a super pistol, but it was heavy. The commander was a lot lighter and easier to carry. He was glad to have both of his weapons back. It was almost time for his afternoon class, so he headed out to teach. Everyone must have heard what happened between him and John because no one asked about the black eye. The class went well, and when it was over, Mark went home to eat dinner. Everyone listened to the news, and then people started showing up for the meeting. Everyone was chatting, and although Mark didn't hear any specific conversations about him and John, he was pretty sure they were the number one item being discussed. The meeting was going as usual. Ted was telling everyone how the education committee had worked out the logistics and how they were going to start classes for the kids on Monday. He was almost done when Mark saw John walking up to the front. The first thought to flash through his mind was that John had somehow heard that they were thinking about banishing him from the subdivision, and he had come to apologize. Like that would save him. Too little, too late, Mark thought. Everyone had gotten quiet to see what John had to say. Mark looked at the crowd and could tell how everyone felt about John from the way they were looking at him. He could see disdain in almost everyone's face. Then suddenly, their looks changed to one of horror, as if he had turned into a monster. Mark looked back at John and saw the reason for everyone's changed expression. John's big Beretta was pointed directly at him. Mark could see that the big pistol wasn't cocked, and John's finger wasn't inside the trigger guard. The Marines had obviously trained John well in proper weapon handling. From this, Mark knew that, at least at this moment, John had no intention of shooting him, but that could change in a heartbeat. John could put his finger on the trigger and complete the long, double-action trigger pull in less than a second. Mark had no doubt that he could do it with deadly accuracy. He weighed his options. John was too far away for him to get his hands on the gun. He practiced gun defenses regularly in his karate class, but the gun had to be within reaching distance for that to work. He could pull his pistol and hope that John missed, but that was unlikely. Maybe one of the other men would shoot John, which might make a bad situation worse. The crowd had parted in front of Mark, as the Red Sea had in front of Moses. If someone shot and missed, it would definitely hit a person on the opposite side. Even if they hit him, the bullet could overpenetrate and hurt someone else. And the likelihood that John would still get a shot or two off after he was hit was almost a given. No, Mark decided his only chance was to talk his way out of it, and he had to do it before someone decided to be a hero. John, Mark's voice was so calm that it surprised even him. I know we've had our differences, but this is not the way to solve them. Mark paused for a moment. Why don't you put the gun down and let's talk about this? No, John screamed. I'm tired of talking. You took everyone away from me. Now I'm going to show them that you're a coward. Now get down on your knees, coward, and beg for your life. So that's what this is about, Mark realized. John felt that Mark had usurped his authority, and now he wanted to get even. He probably had no intention of shooting. He just wanted to embarrass the man who had become his nemesis. Mark knew that John certainly wouldn't shoot until he got what he wanted. After all, if he were dead, John wouldn't be able to get his way. Mark spoke again with cool confidence in his voice. John, this is not the way that grown men solve their... Shut the fuck up! John pulled the hammer back on the Beretta and took a step toward Mark. His hand was starting to shake visibly. Get down on your knees and tell me you're sorry for all the shit you've done to me. He must be getting rattled that this little scheme isn't working out the way he planned, Mark thought. He could see that John's eyes were glazed over like he was sleepwalking. Mark was thinking about what to say next when he heard another voice. John Joseph Olson, have you lost your mind? It was John's wife. She walked right up to him, stood between him and Mark, and grabbed the gun to take it away. They struggled for a fraction of a second, and a loud sound made everyone freeze. No one moved for what seemed like an eternity to Mark. Then he noticed the growing red circle on Mrs. Olson's shoulder. She half fell, half sat on the driveway. Mark could see that she was holding her stomach. Lisa was over to the injured woman as if by magic. John was on his knees with the pistol on the ground in front of him, begging for his wife's forgiveness. She looked at him as a mother might look at a mischievous child, unable to follow the slight annoyance of his behavior to even slightly disguise the love she felt for him. Lisa was yelling something at someone in his direction, but they must not be listening to her. He looked around to see who she was talking to, but there was no one standing close to him. He realized that she was addressing him. Mark, I said, get me something to use as a gurney. Mark turned and opened the garage door. He pulled out a 6-foot plastic folding table. He carried it over to Mrs. Olson and laid it down. He realized he didn't know her first name. He then helped Lisa slide her onto the table, and several other hands appeared to pick up the makeshift gurney. Lisa led them into the kitchen, and they set the table on top of the island. Lisa pulled a pair of scissors out of the junk drawer and started cutting the blouse off of John's wife. Lisa sent Jim to their camper to get her medical bag. Doc Vasquez had his hands over the shoulder wound in a losing effort to slow the bleeding. John was holding his wife's hand, begging her to hold on. Lisa pushed him back so she could find the entrance wound. She wiped the blood off the woman's stomach with a clean dish towel. Mark saw the blood drain from her face when she saw where the bullet had entered. She took a deep breath and had the doc move his hand so she could check the exit wound. It was about the size of a quarter and didn't look too bad to Mark, but he couldn't believe the amount of blood that was pouring out. He saw Lisa trace a line between the two holes with her eyes and then put Doc's hands back. The two medics shared a glance that told Mark more than he wanted to know. John, you need to say whatever you need to right now, the tall, blonde nurse whispered to the woman's husband and killer. No, you have to save her. I didn't mean to, John yelled. John, there's nothing we can do. Even if we could call 911, we wouldn't be able to get her to the hospital in time. Her injuries are too serious and she's losing too much blood. John turned to his wife and buried his head into her good shoulder. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I just wanted to scare him. Please forgive me. The woman put her hand on the back of his head in a way that once again reminded Mark of a mother with her wayward son. Her colorless lips whispered something in a voice so low that Mark wondered if even John could hear it. In the middle of the second sentence, the lips stopped moving and the loving hand slipped from the back of his head. No, John screamed. He ran out of the house, sobbing uncontrollably.